You don't have to fix it because it's unfixable. It's just about showing that you're there, that you understand, and not trying to be perfect.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily. Grief is universal, something that every one of us will experience in life. But not just experiencing it, it's something that we will carry forwards with us. And yet, somehow, we're still wildly unprepared for when grief arrives. Why? Because it's not something that we're taught to hold, to navigate, to support. So, how can we navigate grief in a world that seems to fall silent as soon as the G word enters the chat? My guest today is here to share how we can break the silence around grief, showing up for ourselves and for others as the perfectly imperfect human beings that we are. Sally Douglas is a grief educator. She's a podcaster who many of you will know as one half of Good Mourning. She's an author, a coach, and a breathwork facilitator, combining science, story, and soul to make healing feel more human and a little less heavy. Oh, Sally, it is morning your time. It is evening my time. It is so wonderful to welcome you from the other side of the world onto Death on the Daily.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks for having me. It's really great way to start the morning. I'm really happy to connect with you and be here.
Oh, I'm so excited for this conversation. And I want to start with a quote actually from your book. And you write about the fact that we are navigating something as old as time. Yet when we mention it, we are met with silence. And obviously this is the big G that is so unspoken in our world. And I want to really root the start of our conversation into your experience with grief. And when your mum, Rose, really tragically suddenly died, I want to really hear from you about where you perhaps noticed that silence the most and just how you navigated your own experience of grief.
The big G, I mean, it is wild, isn't it? That it is something that is as old as time. Everyone goes through it. No one is exempt from grief. Yet, we're not prepared for it when it happens to us. I certainly wasn't. When Mum died suddenly, I'd never really given grief a thought. Like, I knew that, my parents were going to die, people that I love were going to die. I'd had grandparents that had passed away. But when it happens to you, it's just cataclysmic, isn't it? And it's all consuming. And for me, I realized that the silence was in so many places. I guess the first one was I was looking for like resources that I could relate to that didn't feel really stuffy or clinical or aimed at like super old people, and I found that there really wasn't much out there. And then I think the silence was in society, not necessarily my friends and family and people close to me, but just in those interactions where people know what's happened, but they don't say, I'm really sorry that you've lost your mum, or, I know this must be a really difficult time for you. It's those comments like, oh, how are you? Or, oh, let me know if you need anything. It's that can also feel like silence, because it feels like your grief isn't being acknowledged at all. It's being brushed to the side. And I think for me, that was a really big shock. Because, when you're in grief, when you've lost someone, whether it's suddenly or whether it's anticipated, it's all consuming, isn't it? It really, there's not one part of your life that isn't impacted. And that for me was a real shock, because it just highlighted how unprepared we are as grievers, but also as a society, to hold that space and to be able to talk about griefs. And people just find it so uncomfortable, especially here in Australia. And so that really spurred me on to want to talk about grief in a really conversational way, in a really open way that doesn't feel like you're tiptoeing around the subject, or that it's got to be clinical or stuffy or, polite. And that's when I met Im, and we kind of decided to start Good Mourning and really have a space where we just talk about grief, but in a really accessible, relatable way. because I think a lot of the content out there and a lot of the conversations that we found in Australia were very sort of like clinical still. And again, like that, I guess, comes into the silence part. Like we were like, where are the conversations for people like us in our early 30s who are kind of going, God, this is shit, and like there's so many weird random things that happen, and it's, you know, like all of the experiences, like it's not just emotional, there's so many elements of grief, right? And the way that it impacts, like where are those conversations? We're not hearing anything. It feels like really silent. And so that's kind of what spurred me on to create Good Mourning with Im. But it is, yeah, it really shocked me how little we talk about grief. And I know that's really changing now, thank goodness. But I think it comes as a big surprise to a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. It's so shocking that it comes as a surprise, given the statistics that 100% of us will die, and grief is equally universal. 100% of us will experience grief in our lifetime. But I think what I really resonated from what you were sharing is with that silence. It's a part of us. Ultimately, within that, people are denying the fact that actually grief is an important part of me, but also with depths of love and meaning and all of that stuff, that silence can be so deafening when it's saying ultimately, with you not being willing to hold that space for me and my grief, therefore where I've always come to is actually that sense of, okay, do I even belong in these spaces? Because it feels so important for me to speak about it without what I call the roadrunner effect, where people just either disappear literally, physically, they will get the hell away from me as quickly as possible, or you can almost just see them just disassociating, disconnecting, and being like, I've completely checked out of this conversation because I can't hold it. And what I really loved in your book is actually just how compassionately you and Im both, and just with your podcast and everything that you do, but in your book it really spoke through from the perspective of your advice for people who are like, I don't know what to do here, but also for people where their friends, perhaps they feel like they've really disappointed them. And that was something that actually really stood out for me in reading your book, is that actually it presents a very compassionate perspective for an understanding for everyone, whilst also bringing people into the conversation and saying, hey, come join us here. So I want to start with grievers, because we want to center people who are grieving. And what advice would you give to anyone who perhaps feels right now, I don't have anyone in my life where I can actually be real with them about me and about grief as a part of me? What advice would you give to someone who's feeling like that?
Well, firstly, thanks for the love for our books. That means a lot. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it and that it resonated with you. Do you know what? It is one of those situations that is so common in grief, but it feels so isolating. But whenever we've heard from our community this experience of people kind of not knowing what to say or doing the roadrunner, as you say, is actually like probably the number one thing that we hear about people from. And it's really, really tricky. And I think it feels very, very isolating. And sometimes, like, the people that we're closest to, they're not the ones that can sit with us in our grief. I think quite often it's quite common to find that you foster these new connections and new friendships with people, like, you know, in being an example for me, you know, we didn't know each other until our moms died, and then we became, you know, best friends and created Good Mourning together. But how do you find those people, right? Like, what do you do if you're feeling really isolated? It can be tricky, and I think it is about finding that courage to put yourself out there, which can feel really difficult when you are deep in grief. You know, sometimes we don't even know who we are. We feel like we've lost a sense of ourselves. Grief can make you feel incredibly self-conscious as well, right? Like, I don't know if you experience this, T, but definitely for me, like going back to what we were just talking about with that, no one knows what to say. People kind of dissociate when they talk to you. So all of a sudden you feel quite self-conscious, like, because you know that there's like you're grieving, it's really obvious, maybe, you know. So there's this new layer of like self-awareness, self-consciousness that kind of comes into the mix that maybe we didn't have before. So that also plays into this, who am I now? You know, how am I going to find people that understand me? So I guess my advice would be to look for people who are like-minded. Maybe it's like a grief support group, whether that's like online, you know, Amber from the Grief Gang, she's got her membership. You know, there's lots of like events, and depending on where you live in the UK or globally, like Instagram communities, online communities, and then and seeing if there's anything like locally for you. Like me and Im, we met at a meetup for motherless daughters. There's Motherless Daughters Australia is the organisation that we met through. One of their like online members organised a meetup at a pub, and we both like decided to go, and then that's how we met. And it was really nerve-wracking going. I really didn't want to go. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I've got friends. This feels weird. Like, this is not my vibe. But also I knew that I needed that connection with someone. Or maybe looking at grief adjacent spaces. So, you know, if you're really into yoga or pottery, like, are there spaces where you might be able to meet new people who might not be grieving, but might be able to hold some space for you? I think it's a really tricky one. It can feel really, really isolating, but I guess my advice would be not to let that silence lock you into isolation for too long, because, you know, we need each other as humans. Connection is one of the most important parts of coping with loss, feeling seen in our grief. So trying to find those little spaces, even if it's like a conversation online with somebody, you know, maybe it's like through one of the grief accounts on Instagram, or even like listening to grief podcasts can be helpful, you know, like just immersing yourself in spaces where there are other people who you can connect to, who understand your loss, can be a really good first stepping stone, to help you kind of start engaging with, I guess, conversations where you feel understood and supported.
Oh, I love that. And also I love the humanness that you share as well about it being that step out of our comfort zone. And that's what has really resonated with me, because I think people would probably look at you and say, oh, Sal and Im, you know, very confident podcast hosts of Good Mourning. Of course, it was almost just, it's just like you would have just met and been super confident through it. But the fact that actually you shared the humanness of your story throughout and said, and that's why I loved reading about it as well, and in the different messages that you exchanged and stuff. And in my experience as well, it's, I always have, people always see me and they see me, my projection of a super confident person. People always are like, you really know yourself, you're very confident. But actually, whenever I go into any new space, I always have that moment, that little gulp before I go in. But as soon as we break that boundary and we say, okay, I'm going to step in, we can just connect to people on a human to human level. And what if we stayed open? And what if our Im could be sat there waiting for us? And actually, I find that those griefy friendships, obviously Im is the ultimate embodiment of that for you, of where you can find the most special friendships through the grief space. And I've had exactly the same thing, where I'm like, I couldn't imagine you not being in my life. And it obviously sucks, the fact that it's grief that's brought us together, but I'm so grateful that you're here with me. And I think as soon as we can just take those steps out, whether it's into community or into the virtual community space, we suddenly see, oh yeah, there's a lot of griefy solidarity here that we can access really, really quickly.
Absolutely. And I think, staying open to connect, being open-minded, like you never know who you might meet. You might meet them in the most random places. It might not be through a grief support group. It might be a friend of a friend, or, you know, and so just really staying open to the possibilities of who you might connect with. And also just like finding that tiny bit of inner confidence to step through, you know, whether it's the door or to say yes, to put yourself forward for it. Because I remember walking like to the pub where I met Im, and feeling so unlike myself, like feeling like I had no chat, like, just really not at all like I was bringing any vibe to this meeting. But, I ended up meeting him, and the rest is history. So it is, it's about staying open.
Yeah, if we can just stay open. And as well, if I'm thinking about, because I am one of the hosts of Amber's Grief Gang membership, and actually it's really lovely as well in these spaces where there's the regular support groups, see the same people coming through. And it's also really lovely seeing that gentle opening of someone who might show up and first time they're a little bit of a fly on the wall and just sit back. And then it might be in the second session, or there's that opening of saying, okay, now I'm ready to share. So as well, the other thing, this is for me, because I'm definitely that type of person where I like to dip a little finger in, and then I'll speak when I'm ready, or then I'll fully open up. So as well, I think the other thing that's coming through for me is the fact that actually in a lot of these grief spaces, it is very much of share if you want to and you don't have to. So as well in that, getting yourself over that virtual door line or the physical door line as well, is also knowing and appreciating that we don't always have to be the super outspoken person in those spaces. We can just sit back, and like I've definitely got my introverted side is always very much like I'm just gonna observe for a while, and I might be the last person who will share in this space, but know that that's totally okay. Or if it's the next session or the one after that you're going to share, even just sitting there and, as you shared, even listening to a podcast or whatever it is, just that sharing of stories and being able to witness can also really support us.
100%. Like, I think it's being in community, feeling seen, like that's the most important thing. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go in there all guns blazing, like ready to share your story, it's just that being part of something.
Love that. So now I want to briefly also talk about the advice that you would give for anyone who perhaps has a griever in their life and doesn't really know what to do. And I really want to ask you this from the perspective of the compassionate take that just speaks so clearly from your writing, from your podcast, etc. Because I know that, and I've actually had people where I've done the reels where I'll have that take of these are really unhelpful things to say to grievers, etc., etc. But I have had some people that really made me think by saying, actually, how can we call people in? And I put myself in the shoes of someone who was grief avoidant for 35 years, and I was definitely that person who was like, oh, I don't know what to say. So I'd love for you to share any advice if someone is tuning in and they've got a griever in their life and they're like, I don't even know. If this was past me speaking, I would be saying, Sal, I don't even know. It's just like, I just go into silence. I have no idea what to say.
Yeah.
And I cannot even get the words out. What advice would you give to someone who's in those shoes?
The first thing that I would say is it's actually like really common and probably quite normal to like not know what to say. Like I'm the same as you, T. Like before mum died, I probably would have been like, no idea, crickets, tumbleweeds, because we're not really taught about grief and death. We're not really, like taught what to say, or because it's not an open conversation in society. 100 years ago, people would have been exposed to death and grief on the daily, but over time it's become something that's more behind closed doors, it's more medicalized. So firstly, I think we give ourselves a hard time for like not knowing what to say, but it's very much one of those things. I think until you've been in it, you can't really grasp exactly how grief impacts you. So I would say that like owning if you don't really know what to say. Like don't be afraid to be like, look, I haven't really been through this, so I'm actually really like not, I can't really find the words, or I'm not super confident in knowing what to say, but I want you to know that I'm really sorry that you're going through this. I really give a shit about you. I think owning that and not being afraid to express that can actually feel quite refreshing for Reba, who is probably hearing a lot of, they've gone to a better place, or, stay strong, or all of these platitudes that we kind of wheel out. And again, don't feel bad if you said these things, because they are really common. And when we don't know what to say, we do default to these kind of statements that we've heard that we think are going to be comforting. They can often feel quite minimizing, because they can just feel like they're just like a repetition of a blank, hollow statement, which I think that's where the power comes in, just being very real in how you express yourself in your language. I don't know the words, but this is really shit, mate, and I'm sorry. Or, I'm a bit awkward around grief, so I don't know exactly what to say, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you, and I hate seeing you like this. And, just trying not to feel the pressure to say something profound or poetic or life-changing, just like being honest, being real, trying not to treat them differently. Like sometimes there's a propensity to maybe tiptoe around someone who's grieving, or avoid them, or, like brush the kind of grief under the rug. Like try and be open, try and be present. I think like active listening is so key when it comes to supporting someone in grief. Like your presence, like how you're showing up, literally like actually paying attention to what they're saying. You don't actually have to have the answers, just listening, and listening really actively and with intention is a great way to support someone who's grieving, because so often people feel unseen. They feel like people don't understand. They're not really listening. They just want to get the conversation over with as quickly as possible so they can go about their day. So really putting yourself fully into that conversation and into that space with them, I think can actually be quite powerful, because that presence can actually make quite a difference. And you don't have to fill the silence or, say all the right words, like just being there. And I think as well, like keep checking in, probably for longer than you think you need to, because obviously you've got the initial death, and then everything that's surrounding that, the funeral, all the dead men, people are, it's a really busy time, and grievers are often, surrounded by people. They're probably getting a lot of messages, a lot of condolences, a lot of love and support. But it's actually then kind of after those first initial months, when that kind of fades and normality resumes, that the support is actually really needed. So obviously don't like blank them when it happens, but be there for longer than you feel you would probably think that you need to be, if that makes sense. And like check in, but don't always expect like a massive response. Something that I found helpful in the early days was people who put like no need to reply at the end of a message, because it was like, oh, okay, they understand that I just don't have the capacity to engage in a back and forth text conversation. So that is quite nice, because you kind of, you're acknowledging their bandwidth, and you're not on them. And I think it's like small tweaks in language as well. So like, it's not saying like, how are you? But it's like maybe reframing it and saying like, how's this week been? Or how today? And that, I think, just gives that permission and that acknowledgement that you understand that things are probably changing day by day. And so you actually want to know how they are in this moment, or how they have been, rather than like, how are you? Which feels very open-ended. Like, of course, they're not great. Like, it puts a lot of pressure on someone grieving, because they feel like they have to just say, yeah, I'm fine. Because are they really going to open up and be like, well, last night I cried until 1 a.m. And then, like, just it feels again like it just kind of makes them feel, it can feel like quite dismissive, unintentional, because if you haven't lost someone, or you haven't been in this situation, you wouldn't really think about that. You wouldn't think that it's, that it's a dismissive thing to say. So again, like, no shade for anyone listening that's going, oh, I've done all those things, like, because you don't know until you're in it, really. And we've all been there. So I think it's just understanding some of these small things that really make a big difference. You don't have to fix it because it's unfixable. You have to like make them feel better. Like, obviously, it's just about showing that you're there, that you understand, and not trying to be perfect.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Not trying to be perfect. And also, even that starting point of just being able to say, it's shit, I don't know what to say. And starting, because that feels really human. And actually, if I think about myself when I was in the rawest of weeds of my grief, and the weeds were all the way up to here, I didn't know what to say. So it was those people who were like, it's really just, it's the worst thing. It's terrible. I don't know what to say. It gave me permission to be like, yep, me neither. And to your point as well, then oftentimes we would just sit in silence, and it would just be the most beautiful for me. So it might have been awkward for them, but the most beautiful silence of just being able to just be. And I think that power of our presence, but also, as you shared, those little adjustments that we can make, because that how are you, or I often think about the corporate language also on emails, and you'll always say, hi, I hope you are well. I thought, how many grievers in my lifetime of corporate, thankfully within my whole my lifetime, but my adulthood of corporate, would I have messaged and said, I hope you're well? And they would probably just return from bereavement leave, which is pathetically short, probably feeling absolutely wretched, and I'm forcing I'm doing well, thank you, I hope you are doing well too. Like, there's no opportunity for anyone to be like, well, no, I'm not doing well, actually, I'm in the full body experience of grief and I don't know what the hell is going on and I feel completely wretched. Like, you
Yeah,
never have that excuse. I was like, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. And you?
I'd love to know actually if anyone has ever replied. Like, honest reply, that would be quite fun to hear. But
Like, no, I'm grieving. Full stop.
do not email me again. Please do not circle back.
So bad, isn't it? Our culture, and as you said, obviously Australia's got far to go. The whole of the world's got so far to go when it comes to our death and grief avoidant culture. Hello, beautiful friend. If you're watching this, then I'm guessing that it might be because you're grieving. And you might be like many of the grievers who I support through my grief coaching, as well as people who I speak to on the daily who say to me, T, I don't have time to grieve. I can't find the space in any month to be able to be with my grief. And that's why I've created Grief Cocoon, a brand new monthly live event that happens online so you can tune in from your own grief cocoon at home. And cocooning is really important in our grief. When we are present with our grief, when we allow space for us to tend to our grief through ritual, through nervous system support and care, through reflection like journaling, all of which we're going to be doing in the grief cocoon. It enables us, like that little caterpillar, to go into our cocoon and to support our transformation and our emergence on the other side as that butterfly who's integrated grief as a part of our story. If you want to join us for the next Grief Cocoon event, then head to the show notes and all of the details are there. But also, you mentioned as well around the busyness of just that particularly that period just after a death, the deathmin, I think you call it, death admin. And you've written yourself how you wanted to fall apart, but there was just no time for that because you were the sole executor of your mum's estate. How did you find space to grieve in that? And also, what were the signs also that were almost telling you, actually, you need to find space here to stop and let yourself grieve?
I think to be honest, in the month that I was back in the UK dealing with the funeral and trying to sell my mum's house, clear a house out, or, close all the bank accounts, all that stuff, I don't actually think I did really have any time to properly process things. It was very much like every day there was a deadline because I knew I had to come back to Australia. There were moments of like outbursts, but then it was like, well, I've got to crack on now because I've got stuff to do. And it was only really when I came back to Australia, and I remember it was just before Christmas. I think we landed back on the 23rd, and then Christmas Eve I went to a friend's barbecue, and I just like I had to leave. I just couldn't be around like people who were making small talk. I felt so exposed. I felt raw, and that was when it was like it just all came out. And then I had like a month before I went back to work, and that was when I just kind of felt that permission to let go and actually start to really process what had happened. Obviously, I knew what had happened when I was in the UK and dealing with her estate, but I also, yeah, I just didn't have time to fall apart. Like there was so much to get done, but it's something that since going on this journey of being in the grief space and world, we talk about this in our book as well. Like there are so many things that impact how one person responds to grief. So it's not just one like theory. It might be like our relationship with the person who died, our cultural upbringing, our religious beliefs, whether we're introverted or extroverted, so many things. But one thing that I found helpful was the grieving styles theory. And you've heard of it, right?
Yeah.
So for listeners who haven't heard of it, basically in the 90s, these two researchers, Kenneth Doka and Terry Martin, they were looking at like how the different genders grieve. And they developed a theory called the grieving styles. And it's since been applied to both male and female. So it's not just about like how the different genders grieve. It's more now generally about how people grieve. But essentially, like on one end of the spectrum, you have what's called the intuitive grievers. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have instrumental grievers. Some people might be like one extreme or the other, but it's really common for people to be a bit of both and maybe move in between different grieving styles. But instrumental grievers are people who find that they process their grief by doing. So they might be more practical. They might find that having a project or starting a charity in their person's honor, like they kind of process their grief by being practical, by doing. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, the instrumental grievers, they very much process their grief. They're more feeling than thinking. So they might really need to sit with their feelings. They might need to really talk about how they're feeling, process it, and share with other people. And they might find that their feelings kind of overwhelm them a bit more, and they really need to like verbalize what's going on. Whereas an instrumental person might be more action focused. And I definitely now looking back can see that actually, even though I wasn't, crying all the time and feeling like I was like grieving in the traditional sense of how we think people grieve, which is obviously, if we look at popular culture, it's like immobilized, like box of tissues on the sofa, completely, unable to do anything. Actually, for me, I now see that was me processing. It's my style. Like I almost like I leapt into action because I didn't have a choice, but I don't think that I would have, regardless, I wouldn't have been immobilized by my grief. I would have needed to, do something. Yeah. And Megan Reardon Jarvis, she's a grief therapist.
Yeah, she's been on the pod.
She always says like grief is a verb. Like it's it is like you need to move the grief through you need to do things, and it might not necessarily be planning a funeral. They could be really small actions, but I think for me, I now see that time as, I think I didn't have space to process, but I probably was in my own way. Like I remember being adamant. Really didn't have a lot of time to do everything, but I remember being adamant that I wanted to do these 5 massive photo collages for the funeral, one for each decade of mum's life.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have time to put this on my list on top of everything else. But for me, I was like, no, really important. I feel like I really want to do this. And so I remember like driving to IKEA and like had I had to get it done this day because I didn't have any other time, and getting these massive like photo frames and going through all the pictures.
Whoa.
And when I look at that now, I think, well, actually, that was me processing,
Yes.
grieving, even though I wasn't like wailing and, like sobbing and, I wasn't distraught. I was still like showing my grief and recognizing what was going on and connecting to mum and what was happening.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been very interesting to think about it in that context, because I think quite often in society, popular culture, we think that to grieve means to be completely immobilized by sadness all the time. And so we can put a lot of shame on ourselves, and we can feel like we're doing it wrong when we aren't behaving in that way, when we're not crying all the time, when we are finding like, that we are able to crack on with the funeral arrangements. And, I went into like PR mode. That's my background, PR. I was very much like, it was like I was organizing an event, but I shamed myself for that, because I felt like, oh, really, like, am I an emotional robot? What's going on here? So that for me has been really key to understand that we all process grief differently. And then when I got home from the UK, like I say, I went to that barbecue and I was just like, I need to get out of here, and just burst into tears. And then that kind of was like, I had that space, I had that time to actually then let everything else come up to the surface.
Yeah.
But I still went back to work a month later and was able to, manage a team, my job without feeling like I was falling apart during the day. Again, that grieving style really shone through with when I came back to work as well. And then the evenings and the weekends would be when I'd feel really griefy, exhausted, so it's interesting to think about it in that context of how we move through these different grieving styles.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I love that, because I think it gives us all permission to meet ourselves where we are. And also I think there is that necessity of that period as well. And unfortunately, there is just so much death admin and so much doing, and with so little support. I love in your book how one of the suggestions for supporters is actually, can you take some of the admin off? Can you write some emails, or can you do this? But ultimately, the majority, 99% of the time, it falls on the shoulders of grievers to be doing all of this stuff. But actually, to your point as well, if you are naturally that instrumental griever, that is totally okay. And similarly, as well, as we know, that period of shock, of numbness, etc., our body is trying to protect ourselves as well. Again, meet yourself where you are. There is no right or wrong way to grieve, and there's no right or wrong way of showing up at any point in time. And I love that, because as you were speaking, I was like thinking about myself, and I was like, there was definitely different seasons of my grief where at some point I've definitely got a lot of the instrumental in me, and like, that's where the podcast came from straight away. I was like, I'm going to do a podcast about grief, and I want to do all these different projects and things that will be my daughter's legacy. But actually, to just give yourself permission for wherever you are and whatever the season of grief is showing for you, that's totally all good. We are only perfectly imperfect human beings, aren't we? After all, there is no perfection in this griefy space. And I always feel like, for me, when I connect in, I think actually allowing myself to just be in it, in whatever it was, in the messiness, in the rawness, in the, all right, I've now got a real surge of creative burst, and much like yourself, I would have these different creative projects. I'm like, I'm just going to fit this in. I really want to do this. And actually, that's really served me well as well. So I think with that presence we can have with ourselves, of actually just be present, honor it, and try not to compare to anyone else. And I guess in families as well, that can be quite difficult if you're looking at other people and saying, am I not doing it right because I don't seem as upset as, I don't know, my sister or someone else. But no, you're just doing you, and that's it, really.
And I think, with families, that can be a real point of tension, because families, people do grieve differently, and they might not understand how the other person is responding, because again, there might be this general assumption that they should all be grieving in a similar way, or we all have different relationships as well with the person who died that impact how we respond to our loss, right? So it can be a really big point of contention for families. But I think as well, just on that point about the dead min, if you are supporting someone who's grieving, like, definitely understand that it is a huge, like, undertaking if you are dealing with someone's estate. Like, and it's not just simply like closing a bank account and organizing a funeral. Often they are like, it can take months, if not years. Like, it took me 4 years
4 years.
finally do the last thing that was in my mum's, like, will and estate. Like, yeah, it took 4 years. And it's overwhelming. Like, when you're grieving, you're obviously, like, not only trying to process the loss, but it's incredibly physical. Like, grief brain is a massive thing.
Yes.
You feel forgetful, foggy, but also it's so overwhelming. So I think if you are supporting someone, like, just knowing that they're also dealing with that on top of, they might not be, but if they are dealing with the dead min, can you proofread an email, or search some things, or like offering that practical support from that level as well. Even like if you're supporting someone who's grieving at work, like, do they want you to proof their emails, or like by you, little tiny things like that might feel really small, but probably massive help to someone whose mind feels fried.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the littlest things. And actually, one of my favorite stories, this is a completely different little thing, but it demonstrates just how the little things can literally be with someone for life. One of my favorite stories is about Nick Cave, and after the tragic death of his son. Yeah, amazing.
His story on grief is the best. I think he is the best person to articulate grief.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And yeah, it was actually, I forget whether it was in a book, or I feel like I read it maybe in The Guardian or somewhere, but he'd written about, he went to a coffee shop near his house to buy some lunch, and it was soon after his son Arthur died. And just from a small little gesture, but the lady who always served him, she'd seen, but they never really had a proper conversation, just a hi. And she gave him his change. She just like squeezed his hand. That was it. And he just said that just one small gesture is, and obviously now he's written about it and lots of people talk about it, but how that just stayed with him as one of the most compassionate acts that anyone had given him in his world at that point. And I think that just demonstrates that, actually, again, don't underestimate the power of proofreading that email, of coming up and putting your hand on someone's shoulder, obviously if they are down with that sort of thing. I definitely work with a few people where they'd be like, no, don't do that. But just giving the little squeeze on the shoulder and be like, do you want me to, is there anything I can take a look at? Or I know you're working on a really big project and there's lots of deadlines, or there's lots of creative, think about our industries, lots of creative approvals and those things that, again, if you've got that grief brain fog, something could get missed that is then going to be suddenly on a massive poster at a massive PR event or something. Those things can really mean the world, but also can just, importantly, just take that, we can breathe and just support and soothe our nervous system in a time where everything just feels so like overwhelming and activating. So I love that. I remember when I was reading your book, actually, that tip for work colleagues, I was like, that is so simple. Everybody needs to know that.
Yeah.
It's just basic, isn't it? And if we could just take one thing off of the pressure off of someone across a week, that is hugely significant when your battery is just on empty.
100%. I remember reading that exact same story. Nick Cave. Yeah, I remember that really stayed with me well. Yeah. For any listeners who are like big readers, who obviously our book is great, but Nick Cave, like, he just writes so, like, everything he writes about grief, I'm like, oh my God, yes, nailed it. Like, he is just so eloquent and just articulates the experience of grief so well. I love him.
Yes. A lot of love for Nick Cave. Now, Sal, I'm conscious of your time. So because you were going into your day, and you're going into a working day in Australia. I'm soon to be going to bed. But I just very briefly, before we close out on our conversation, just wanted to touch on the fact that Mother's Day is coming up in the UK. I know that everywhere around the world seems to have a completely different days. So I think there might be one in maybe June. I'm not sure when it is in Australia, um, but obviously for you, and given the loss of your mom, I just thought for some finishing words, and it could be relevant for Mother's Day, it could be relevant for any other celebration, birthdays, death anniversaries, Christmases, etc. If there's any closing words that you can give to anyone who perhaps is feeling a little bit raw at a time of whether it's Mother's Day or another big celebration moment.
100%. I think sometimes we can put so much pressure on these days, whether it's Mother's Day or another milestone event like their birthday, your birthday, Christmas, it can feel like we need to do something really big to honor them because our grief feels really big. And so we feel like that needs to translate into doing something massive. And that pressure can feel quite overwhelming. So I think just knowing that you don't have to perform your grief or do something huge for it to be a meaningful day to remember them. Like it might just be that you play a song that reminds you of them, that you talk to them out loud. Maybe you watch their favorite movie. You go to a cafe that they really liked and you order their coffee order. So actually, I can't remember where it was, but I heard someone say, I think it was on Instagram. It might have been on Instagram. Someone shared that sometimes they'll go to a coffee shop and order a coffee in their mum's name.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
People also do it for babies as well, for baby loss.
Yeah.
They can hear their daughter or son's name. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really beautiful. But I think as well, there is that pressure. And so maybe removing yourself, like not looking at social media, that was something that I found really helpful because, there's obviously a lot of people who have their mums and they're, sharing their love and then, honoring their mum on social media. And that can sometimes really compound the grief. And so my advice would be to maybe step away from those spaces where it might feel a bit triggering or it might feel difficult. Don't be afraid just to give yourself that space, but also don't be afraid to not do anything if it doesn't feel right. If you're like, I'm absolutely exhausted, because grief is so exhausting, especially in the early years. And you might just want to take it really slow and you might not have the energy to do something big, like to honor them. So just know that it doesn't just boil down to how you respond on this one day. But it might be that you do have the energy and you do want to do something. You might want to connect with other people, see friends, do something like go to their gravesite or where their ashes are. Like, again, there's just no right or wrong way. And I think as well, like, not everyone has a perfect relationship with their mum. Like, I've spoken about this before, but me and my mum had a really difficult relationship. Like, towards the end of her life, in my probably the last 5 years of her life, our relationship got stronger. But for most of my teen years and early adult life, our relationship was not great. And that, comes with its own feelings of complexity. And it's a lot to process when you're grieving as well. It adds another layer. So again, if your relationship wasn't perfect with your mum or it was difficult, that can then also feel like, oh, well, how do I respond to these big milestone days where, people are maybe pouring out this love. And obviously there is, to me, there was love, but it was complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think allowing yourself to have all of the different feelings that can especially feel really heightened and prevalent around Mother's Day, just knowing that grief is really complex and we're human, so there's so many different emotions and layers to our relationships with other people. So again, giving yourself permission if you feel I'm really not sure how to respond to this milestone, to this day. like allowing the complexity and the different emotions to be there, because not, grief is complicated, and not everything is always rosy and perfect memories. So it can feel quite layered when we now feel like we have to honor them on Mother's Day, or form this kind of perfect grief, if that makes sense. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, that's like a just perfect TED talk on the question, because actually what you've given in all different areas is that permission to not be that picture perfect version of these different celebrations, and actually you can honor it in your way. You can be really low key DIY. You don't have to do anything, man. You don't even have to do anything if you don't want to. And actually that permission, and again that permission slip to feel everything, I think is so important. Because when I think about, for example, with my daughter's birthdays, first birthday, I say I went all out in my like classic low-key DIY way, but her second birthday, I just didn't have the energy to. And actually second birthday hit me a lot harder. And I just had to say, do you know what? I'm just going to be able to pick a flower from the garden and take that to her grave, and that's it. And that is enough. None of the making everything and stuff like that. So actually, I think if we can just give ourselves that permission to say, do you know what? I don't have to be perfect. I am enough in however I show up in the messiness of grief and the messiness of this human experience. I think that was such beautiful permissions, as well as the boundaries as well. I think that's so important. Obviously for me as a bereaved mother, Mother's Day has its own charge and all of that stuff. And I'm exactly the same. It's permission to not go on my phone, not be on. I'm on various WhatsApp groups as well, where it suddenly gets lit up with all these things of like Mother's Day, celebrating mothers. And I just archive them all before Mother's Day. So I know I can just have a peaceful weekend and not think about it, and just step away from the noise and then step back in on the other side of it. So I think that's really, really, really wise. And that's where as well we can just connect in before and say, how am I really feeling this celebration? And actually, where do I need to put those boundaries up? So yeah, thank you, Sally. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm glad it resonated. And I think as well, yeah, if you have lost a child, it is that, like you said, having those boundaries, what spaces do you want to be in, and what spaces do you think could be potentially draining or griefy, and having maybe that little bit of a plan in place, like you say, archive those chats, maybe not checking your emails where you might be getting loads of Mother's Day spam, being around people who support you and kind of understand, who might not trigger you, or it's maybe having that bit of a plan in place as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think that's where as well we can learn year on year. I think I bowled into my first Mother's Day after, and I was just completely unprepared for it. But actually then come year 2 and now I'm in year 3, it's like, all right, yeah, okay, I know the score. So as well, I think that's where we can just have these little lessons, learnings, put them in our back pocket and see actually, how do I want to honor these days or not?
Yeah.
So yeah, love that. Well, Sally, before we close out, I would love for you to share with anyone anything that you wish to about. I mean, I'm sure so many people listening are going to be like, I know Good Mourning, I know Sal, I know it. But for anyone who doesn't have you in their world, where can they find you?
So, Good Mourning is on all podcast platforms. So just type in Good Mourning and you should find us. It's morning with a U. On Instagram, I am Sally Douglas Grief. And Good Mourning podcast. So type any of those in podcast platforms and Instagram, and you'll find me and Good Mourning. Also, our book is called Good Mourning: Honest Conversations About Grief and Loss, and that is available on Amazon and any good bookshops or bookstores online.
So it's so good. I devoured it in about 2 days, which I think you're in the esteem. You're in a little. It takes me a while to read books normally, but you, Catherine Mannix, says it's mostly actually books around death and grief. The ones that's been it.
Catherine Mannix's book, With the End in Mind, is that?
Yes.
That is like mind blowing. I think everyone should read that book, because it's one of the best books I've ever read, I think.
Same. Yeah, actually, exactly the same for me. Yeah. I love it. And for me, it was that. I think that was my first book on death that I ever read. And it just made me take an exhale. I was like, I can kind of relax in a weird way. because you sort of realize that everything that we're taught to, obviously, don't get me wrong, death is existential and very, very scary. I'm not saying, Amber and I were talking about this actually on the pod, of being like, we're not exactly going to be going into it being like, yeah, super chill. Like, we've got this, we work in the grief space, we get it. But at the same time, it did make me think, actually, it's not the Hollywood ending of suddenly, I don't know, you're choking and it's horrendous or whatever it is. It really, really relaxed me. So I think you're right. Everybody should read that book. I kind of wish it was the type of stuff that they would teach in schools, but I can imagine you'd have a revolt of a lot of horrified parents given our culture. Like, why are you teaching our children this?
Why are you teaching our kids about the death rattle? But no, it should be there. Yeah, anyone who is interested in like the reality of what it is like to die, check out Catherine Mannix. Definitely, it's a great one.
It's such a good book. I'm just thinking now about the kids coming home being like, Mum, we learned about the death rattle. Did Granddad have a death rattle when he died? We're like, oh my goodness. But I would also definitely recommend as well, on the grief side, your book is just absolutely flipping brilliant. So I can wholeheartedly as well say I've told you this on messages. I'm definitely going to be recommending it out to everyone, including grief supporters as well as grievers. But Sally, before we complete, is there any final words that you want to share with the audience?
Just know that you're not alone. Like, I think that grief can be so lonely, like we spoke about earlier. I think just hearing the words "you're not alone" can be really powerful, because it can feel so bloody lonely.
I love that. You are not alone. I've now got Michael Jackson stuck in my head. But I love
that could be a good grief anthem, couldn't it? If you think about it.
So true.
Maybe
wow.
Maybe one day when we do an event somewhere, like me, you, and Amber, we can blast that out.
Let's get everybody
lyrics. That is a great, actually, on the grief support point, sing that to them. No, don't really, but the lyrics, could be
yeah, maybe yeah. I was just, now my brain's gone into like all the how can we make this into like the, when the fans sing like Sweet Caroline or whatever, it becomes like the global grievers anthem. Grievers unite together. You are not alone. I'm not going to try singing it because I have not got a Michael Jackson style voice.
Like you should make it the outro to this podcast though.
Do you reckon? I wonder how much do you reckon that'll be to just going into our little worlds? But I'm like, how much would that be to license that from Michael Jackson?
Oh yes, probably not.
Maybe not. Maybe we'll just do our own little bootleg version. But on that note, you are not alone, everybody. And Sally, it's been an absolute joy to share this space together. So I'm so grateful to you. I'm grateful for all of your work. I'm grateful to you for actually, I think, being it was yours, Amber's, and the Worst Girl Gang Ever that were the first grief podcast, and Carrie Ad Lloyd's were the first grief podcast that I really connected into. So you are one of my OGs. So thank you so much, Sally, for sharing the space with me today.
Oh, thanks, T, for having me. It's been such a lovely chat.
Thank you for joining me on Death on the Daily. If you liked this episode, it would mean a lot if you could hit subscribe. Plus, head to the show notes to find out about my work as a grief coach, and there's a grief journaling freebie there for you. Until we meet here next time, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something